morning. My name is Ian Ritchie, my colleague.
I'm Jonathan Shaw. We're both from Ritchie Studio.
We have 9 minutes because the last minute is silent. Project which is sandwiched between Valletta and Indina, two World Heritage sites, and Farsons are the Heineken of Malta, or the Guinness of Malta, and they have the iconic Brewhouse and a 200-meter long facade. And it was the client who wanted to start this industrial heritage in Malta. So I'm going to hand over to Jonathan, who's going to run through the project.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, everyone. So Farsons Brewery itself originally started and opened in the 1950s. The site here, as you can see at the moment, was in a really industrial area called Imriel. Now, Imriel, over the time, has now become the Malta Central Business District, which actually, this particular project was one of the key cornerstones to actually begin that transformation of the area. The site itself, when we began, was also a site to understand the importance of the heritage significance and the reuse of this. Therefore, in the diagram on the right-hand side there, we can see how this was assessed to look at the heritage of the listed brewhouse and the colonnade, what areas potentially needed to be demolished to make way for new construction. There was an existing service yard. How do we maximize this site? How do we optimize and make this a really important area within Malta? And the whole site itself effectively is 2 hectares. And one thing that's really important to know that only 45% of the site is actually built area. The rest is laid over for landscape. It's a project of 2 halves. Effectively, the first is the brewhouse. The brewhouse itself has its own historical areas of innovation. It was the first use of ice egg reinforcement and also the first use of slip form technology. And the top photograph there, you can see the site of the brewhouse in the 1950s, including a very large water collection, which is really important in Malta as it is a very scarce resource. The key principles behind the design of the brewhouse are effectively the climate, the importance of architecture, in particular the heritage, and the landscape around it. Within that, we saw 3 subgroups that were really important to ourselves, which was the use of daylight, the creative reuse of this existing working single-use brewery to begin with, and the importance of that industrial heritage. This has then been transformed into what is the Farsons Brewery experience, a series of creative workspace, event spaces, and a heritage hall. Now, the project, of course, not without its design challenges. We need to consider how we conserve the industrial heritage identity, enhance the reputation of the client, Farsons itself, respecting that there is a working brewery next to this site, advocating, of course, for repurpose and reuse. When we first started this project, the consideration was that actually a majority of the existing brewhouse should be demolished. Through various different techniques, we proved how that would be an unwise decision and actually should retain this because of the importance of embodied carbon within the building. We need to think about to illuminate this deep plan. Of course, it was a working industrial site, now to become a place of entertainment and office spaces. And finally, how do we ensure adaptability within the plan itself? The building itself, the brewery project, was seen under the direction of Louis Ferrugia, who was an architect by profession. And as you can see there, with the original building completed in June of 1950. As part of the transformation, the keys associated with this, we think about the restoration of the existing facade and the brewhouse. How do you repurpose and reuse it? But also how do you create a sense of drama? Here, currently under construction, we can see that there's a large industrial insertions into the facade. In this case, in the use of a large bridge link. We mentioned before about the use of the slip form walls. Now, these are actually in itself could be a sort of barrier for that space. So how do we create insertions within that? We start to play with geometry and form here to actually bring light and ventilation and a visual continuity between the different spaces. These spaces themselves, these walls, should I say themselves, are 20 meters high and are actually structural within themselves. So therefore, that placement of those openings was particularly important. We need to create light into the space. 2 deep light wells to bring natural light right from the very top at near level 3 and 4, right down to the ground floor level. As the place of industrial use, there was prefabricated vats, effectively with the fermentation of the beer, throughout the space. These have been considered to actually be used as co-working spaces. Each one, you have your own individual vat, and therefore potentially for meetings and conversation within that. the history of the brewery continues. This, known as the Redler Room, you can see they were working the industrial example of where the beer process came from the top down to the bottom. We're seeing this as being used as a major meeting space with that impressive industrial heritage at the heart. As we go lower down the process, we start to get to the copper brewers, now the copper brewing vessels. There are actually 3 different construction techniques considered here. One is cast, which is on the left-hand side, bolted in the middle, and welded finally on the right-hand side. Restoration process is ongoing to how you can actually make these a key feature within the space. Taking a little journey up the building. Level 1, the primary entrance. You can see from the main visual there the key co-working spaces and also the Heritage Hall. As we work our way up, that space continues and expands. We start to reveal those copper vessels. And finally, the workspace continues as you get to the 3rd level. The brewhouse itself is an abundance of not only interior spaces, but exterior. We have a multiple set of terraces across that space from the very top floor, which will become a Chisk brewery experience. The semicircular terrace you see in the center there, which effectively is an open plan space from a Redler meeting room. And finally, a large entertaining terrace at the back. And as you can see within the section donated by the sunlight, that deep daylight penetrating right into the main space. We said it was a project of 2 halves. The second half, Trident Park, design principles behind this, very similar, revolving around climate, the importance of climate, the importance of the architecture of the site and the landscape. This one distilled down into the use of color, a series of gardens, and the importance of sunlight, which led to a very low carbon design, which we'll explain in a moment, the courtyards, workspaces, and events. Key design challenges to this actually was including conserving the industrial heritage, advocating again for repurpose and reuse, advocating for whole life carbon design to inform that reuse, not optimizing the net lettable area by bringing all the circulation space externally, which resulted in 95% net lettable area, ensuring spatial adaptability. Currently, they are creative use offices, but can easily be adapted into residential. Also important, delivering a non-air conditioned environment and the use of opening windows, which we'll explain shortly, preserving the reputation and respecting a working brewery. A few key points about this. There's all low-rise passive design buildings. They're set within a series of gardens, creating a series of indoor and outdoor rooms. There's 15,000 meters squared of mixed-use workspace, restaurants, gyms, medical centers. Set behind, as I said, this 200-meter-long heritage facade. There are 2 reservoirs underneath the 2 extreme buildings to actually provide water for irrigation and WC flushing, etc. There's also 1,200 meters squared of solar panels, which actually forms 12% of the overall site, creating a huge sort of on-site renewable energy. And part of that key restoration is this heritage facade, which we talked about as being 200 meter long. This acts as a gateway to the gardens and the buildings beyond. An example of some of the gardens within there. The project, therefore, is about being human. So creating a series of spaces within these courtyards. The walkways beyond the background are effectively the streets for encounter. The gardens themselves, almost the living rooms where we meet. The buildings themselves, place of works, therefore it's a place to focus. And we just talked about the Brewhouse, which is actually the place of entertainment and nourishment where you go in the mornings and the evenings. And as we pointed out, there's also fixed solar shading on the east and west orientation of these buildings in order to ensure the right thermal environment. At the center of the site is the reuse of an historic entrance building. This was an initial boardroom and arrival space, which is considered to be developed into the new heritage entrance, a conference hall, and also reusing its space as a boardroom. We talked about the overall whole life carbon content of the building. By doing a whole life carbon analysis, which was really important at the beginning, we've shown that compared to the existing traditional conventional office building in Malta, you end up with a 55% reduction in whole life carbon emissions. What's particularly important is within the operational carbon, the building itself use what's called a thermally active building system, known as TABS. This is where we actually maximize the thermal mass of the building and actually chill the concrete slabs themselves. This therefore reduces and removes the need for air conditioning, and we just rely on passive ventilation between that. This reduces in a huge carbon saving over its time, and also a reduction in renewal repair through the use of robust materials that can last a long time. How do I? And now a little video to fly through.
Whilst it's flying through for 45 seconds, just to say this is a North African environment, and to achieve without any moving parts the natural ventilation, the solar shading, by using the buildings and the fixed geometry that we've used for the shades, we've achieved something quite exceptional. And the signs are that we will not only achieve the carbon reduction, but the really important thing is long-term, they're environments that can work for different uses. So we anticipate a 400-year life from the new buildings and a 300-year life for the old brew house. Thank you.